Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a special Sunday edition of the Watchman newscast live stream. We are going live. Now, we took a day off yesterday for the first time in 2 weeks, but we are going live virtually every day now that Israel is at war with Hamas in Gaza and may very soon be at war with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon as well. And who knows, perhaps even with the head of the snake, the Iranian regime. Now, this has been a very busy weekend once again. It's hard to believe 15 days ago, October 7th, the most heinous attack in the modern history of the modern state of Israel unfolded as Hamas butchered some 1,400 Israelis, mostly civilians. And the accounts we're hearing, folks, day by day become more graphic and more stomach churning about what Hamas actually did to women, to children, to the elderly, to civilians, to families wholesale in southern Israel as they literally invaded southern Israel, over 20 communities throughout that beautiful region along the Gaza border. But here's the state of play right now. Number one, as you saw in the title of this live stream, and we have thousands with us right now, and we will have thousands more, by the way, by the time we are done. Welcome, everyone. And as you saw in the title of this live stream, Israel is intensifying its airstrikes in Gaza, obviously softening up these Hamas targets and infrastructure in advance of a coming ground invasion. That's number one. The second piece to that is Israel also, you may have noticed, intensifying airstrikes against Hezbollah as well. We're going to break down where that may be heading. But first, to Gaza and the ground invasion. Right before I came on air with you here, about 2 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States, Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, told Israeli Defense Forces troops that by the time this war is over, and he mentioned it may take months, Hamas will, quote, be no more. Now, this is very important because, folks, we're hearing this kind of rhetoric out of Israeli leaders, both on the political end and the military end as well. And it is appropriate to have that as your goal, the complete destruction and elimination of Hamas once and for all. And I believe Israel will do that, will carry through. The only issue is the pressure right now being felt by Israel from the Biden administration. We're hearing more and more reports that the Biden administration is doing a few things. Number one, it's telling Israel to delay its ground invasion of Gaza because of the hostage situation there. Now, on one hand, folks, look, everyone wants to get the hostages home. There's at least 208 hostages still held. We had 2 Israeli Americans released, a mother and a daughter, on Friday by Hamas. Everyone wants to get the remainder of the hostages home. We don't know their state right now. If some of them are dead, God forbid, we just don't know. There are several, not only Israelis, but several foreign nationals, again, including several Americans, who were taken captive of Hamas and dragged into the bowels of hell in these tunnels beneath Gaza. So on one hand, understandable completely that nations want to get their citizens back from Hamas's clutches. But a word of caution here, and a major one. Hamas right now is playing the PR game. They are propaganda masters. Over the years, as we've documented here in the newscast, Hamas has used time and again civilians as human shields. And then when those civilians, sadly and predictably, are killed, Hamas beams those images around the world and says, look what Israel did. So that's one thing to bear in mind when it comes to Hamas's game with civilians. The other part to this is, look, Hamas is using these hostages clearly as bargaining chips, and the Biden administration seems to be falling for this and seems to be thinking perhaps that Hamas is rational, and they are rational in their own way. But when it comes to an approach to Israel, an approach to the United States, it's a completely irrational, demonic hatred that Hamas possesses. So my message to the Biden administration is, don't be drawn in and hoodwinked because Hamas released 2 hostages. Is Hamas going to draw this out and say, well, we'll release 2 hostages per week? And then is Israel supposed to delay more and more and more? And the weeks go on. And what happens? I mentioned this on the live stream the other day, folks. Does Israel lose momentum? Look, it's already 15 days. I think most of us right now on this stream presumed that Israel would very likely have launched the ground invasion by now. Certainly that's the kind of the rhetoric and language coming from Israeli leaders. But is Hamas seeking to stretch this thing out, dangling as a bargaining chip. And I hate to even use that term, but it's what they're doing, the hostages, and telling the world, look, if Israel invades, there's no telling what may happen to these hostages. But if Israel does not invade on the ground, perhaps out of the goodness of our hearts, we'll let some more of these hostages go. And it seems to me that Western leaders are taking the bait, surprise, surprise, taking the bait and saying to Israel, hey, hold on, hold off more on that ground invasion. We may get more of our people back. On one hand, I get it completely. On the other hand, put yourselves in Israel's shoes, folks. The Israel Defense Forces, you have over 300,000 reserve soldiers, along with regular soldiers, poised not only on the border of Gaza, but the border of Lebanon as well. And they are ready. I've spoken to some of them on the ground. I have friends on the front lines right now. I just spoke to one this morning who's heading to the front lines of Gaza. He texted me and said, Erick, I'm going. I said, I'm praying for you. Godspeed. And let God go ahead of you and the Israel Defense Forces here. But eventually, folks, when you're sitting around for weeks and weeks, it has an effect on morale. Ask any soldier. It has an effect on morale. It affects momentum. And then on the other hand, you have world opinion intensifying against Israel. And the world predictably, and we laid this out on the live stream, we knew it was going to go in this direction. The world, in the wake of October 7th, in the wake of a genocidal mini Holocaust, a massacre perpetrated by Hamas, was very sympathetic towards Israel and said, Israel, you need to do what you need to do to strike back and destroy this demonic entity known as Hamas once and for all. As the time goes on, the world gradually but steadily reverts to its default knee-jerk anti-Israel stance. And all of a sudden, it's not about the 1,400 mostly civilian Israelis who were massacred in completely graphic horror movie fashion. It's more and more about Israel. Now, you must come to a ceasefire. You must open up a humanitarian corridor. We are concerned about civilians in Gaza. Look, everyone's concerned about civilians in Gaza. But let's not take our eye off the ball of the larger issue here, that Israel was attacked by a genocidal organization of modern-day Nazis that wish its destruction. And if this genocidal organization is not crushed, it will do it again, or at least attempt to do it again. That should continue to be the main conversation piece in this whole issue, in this whole affair. But it's not. And world opinion, as you see, folks, yesterday, 100,000 people in London marching against Israel and in support of Hamas. And you may say, no. These are just supportive rallies for the people of Gaza, the Palestinian civilians. No, they're not. These are pro-Hamas rallies unfolding across the UK, across American college campuses. We had riots in New York City last night, thousands of people in the streets fighting with New York City police officers, pro-Hamas rallies. The barbarians are not just at the gates. They are clearly inside the gates. And that's what Israel is facing, the intensification as the days go on and the ground invasion is delayed. Hey, look, folks, I don't have inside intelligence that the Israeli military has. Clearly, these are master strategists that Israel has. According to U.S. News and World Report, a report released earlier this year, Israel has the fourth most powerful military in the world. These are very smart people. They know what they're doing. So from my layman view, and look, I interview Israeli generals, military defense officials, both current and former, on a regular basis. You've seen me do it here on the Watchman many times, bringing you interviews, in-depth interviews with top Israeli decision makers, right on up to the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So they know what they're doing. And in my layman view, I'm saying, wow, I'm sitting back and watching and saying, the more this stretches out, the more the world is going to pressure Israel into a premature ceasefire. And we know how this goes because we've seen this script before. We shall see. But if the Biden administration is indeed restraining Israel, that's a big problem, folks. And we cautioned this on the live stream over the past several days. Joe Biden, in public, key point there, in public since October 7th, for the most part, has said all the right things. He stayed to a pro-Israel line. He said yesterday, I am a Zionist. I mean, in normal circumstances, you would applaud and say, wow, he's really taking a stand for Israel. My concern is not the public statements, which by and large have been extremely supportive of Israel. My concern is what's going on behind the scenes and the pressure being put on by he and Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State. That is a major point of concern on two fronts. We mentioned delay the Gaza invasion, that front. And secondly, Lebanon, southern Lebanon. Again, more and more reports are emerging that the United States is attempting to restrain Israel from striking Hezbollah in Lebanon in a more forceful way. Now, some Israelis I speak to are saying, look, we think this is a golden opportunity to not only crush Hamas, but to crush Hezbollah as well. And we've talked about this, folks, over the past several days, the intensifying of Israel's strikes against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And by the same token, Hezbollah's strikes against Israel as well. Hezbollah continues to fire these anti-tank missiles at communities across northern Israel. Now, as we reported here on the live stream, on Friday, some 28 of those beautiful communities, Israeli communities in northern Israel, have been evacuated. Now, Kiryat Shimona, a town of 20,000 plus, was evacuated on Friday as well. And now yesterday, the IDF announced 14 more Israeli communities in northern Israel near that Lebanon border, Hezbollah land, have also been evacuated. That brings the total to close to 300,000 Israelis overall who have been evacuated in southern Lebanon and along the Gaza border. So clearly, Israel, if it wants to proceed in that way, could strike Hezbollah and strike them hard and perhaps eliminate two existential threats simultaneously. Certainly, there are many in Israel who feel that way, who are saying Hezbollah, it's basically a state of war right now. These are not just border skirmishes. For instance, Israel today, Sunday, October 22nd, has carried out some 5 strikes against Hezbollah cells along that Lebanon border. Folks, that's a lot. That's not just a border skirmish. And some 17 Hezbollah members have been killed by Israeli strikes over the past week plus. And in return, Israelis have been killed as well. Hezbollah, by the way, key point, has initiated each of these altercations along the Israel-Lebanon border, and it's Israel responding each time. Again, because Israel is, it seems, fighting with one hand tied behind its back in the north, as the West, in particular the U.S., are pressuring Israel, don't strike Hezbollah, because if you do that, it will expand the war. Well, guess what? The war is very likely going to expand anyway, I'm sad to say, as Iran's entire ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides ignites. We've seen signs already. Obviously, Gaza's on fire. Southern Lebanon, the uptick. I just mentioned what's going on there. In Yemen, on Thursday or Friday, we reported on this last week, that barrage by the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen that we talked about late last week on the live stream, firing cruise missiles and drones out of Yemen, headed towards Israel. A U.S. Navy warship in the Red Sea shot each and every one down, thank God. But folks, that engagement between the Houthis and a U.S. Navy warship lasted reportedly some 9 hours. So for hours and hours, the Houthis were firing barrages aimed in the direction of Israel, and thank God a U.S. warship was shooting them down in the Red Sea. Now, the Houthis are Yemen some 1,000 miles south of Israel. You might say, wow, that's a long way. But thanks to the Iranian regime, the head of the snake, the Houthis have the missiles, the rockets, and the attack drones that are able to reach Israel. Think of a beautiful city like Eilat, the southernmost point of Israel, a Red Sea resort. Israel 2 years ago actually moved an Iron Dome battery to Eilat, to that area, because of concerns about the Houthis. So that could be inflamed. And Iraq and Syria. Now, 2 things to mention here, folks. Number one, in Iraq and in Syria over the past several days, a complete uptick in attacks against U.S. assets there. Some U.S. citizens wounded in these Iran-backed Iranian proxy strikes, these Shia militias in Iraq and Syria targeting U.S. soldiers there. Now, number one, there are some 900, I believe, U.S. soldiers still in Syria on the ground, mostly in the eastern part of that country. Probably 2,000 or so in Iraq still. And they're targets. And Iran has made very clear that they are targets, and they're going to up their attacks against the United States. Now we hear today, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Defense Secretary, said that the U.S. is expanding its anti-missile deployments, Patriot anti-missile batteries, etc., in the region. No surprise, and a wise move, because again, U.S. forces, I don't want to say they're sitting ducks, but they're there. They're in the heart of the region, and they're surrounded on all sides, quite literally, by Iran and its proxies. So you have a disastrous potential scenario there. So Iraq on fire, Syria overnight. Another big topic here. The title of this live stream says Israel intensifies airstrikes in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Syria. You might say Syria. We talked about Gaza and Lebanon. Let's dig in. A repeat of last week. Israel once again, overnight, carried out crippling airstrikes against the Aleppo and Damascus international airports. They are shut down once again, folks, and it's not the first time. I'm going to break down what's happening in Syria right now and the prophetic implications in a minute. Before I do, and before I forget, a quick reminder, two things. Number one, if you have not subscribed to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, do so now. We're coming to you every single day with these breaking updates, the kind of information that you're just not getting in the mainstream media, and then some. So be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. One more thing as well that's very important, I think, especially for our intercessors and prayer warriors watching right now. Many have asked me about or how they can help people on the ground in Israel. I mentioned a minute ago that some 40 communities now in northern Israel have evacuated, dozens in southern Israel as well. People are just going to the center of the country, essentially, to escape Hamas and Hezbollah rocket barrages with their little kids, with the elderly. It's a horrible situation. Bomb shelters. People are saying, how can I help Israel and bless Israel, fulfill that mandate, Genesis 12:3, to bless the people of Israel? Well, a great organization called Meir Panim is doing just that. They're based on the ground in Israel. I've worked with them, folks, on the ground, serving meals to Holocaust survivors, so I can vouch for them. They are the real deal. mpgive.org, mpgive.org. If you want to help Israel right now, you feel helpless because you're not in Israel, this is a great way to do it. Meir Panim, mpgive.org. I know from personal experience, I don't plug a lot of organizations here on the news channel, but I know from personal experience, Meir Panim is the real deal, and the aid will get to the people who need it most, those beleaguered communities in southern and northern Israel. So check Meir Panim out for sure. Okay, Syria, why the airports? Because some people said on the comments last week, because this also happened about a week ago. Israel struck the airports in Damascus and Aleppo in Syria, and some people left comments saying, that's a war crime. You're shutting down airports? That's horrible. Well, folks, here's the IDF's reasoning behind not only during this current war that began on October 7th with the Hamas invasion, but over the past year plus, we've reported here in the newscast that Israel several times has struck both the Damascus and Aleppo international airports. Now, why would they do that? It's real simple. The Iranian regime, I know you're shocked to hear this, but the Iranian regime has been transiting weapons from Iran into Syria, through the airports, do the math, through Damascus, through Aleppo. Then those weapon shipments are being carted off across the border into southern Lebanon, into the hands of Hezbollah, or they stay in Syria and they'll be fired out of Syria. Now, in particular, these are precision-guided munitions, PGMs for short. They do exactly what their name says. They are missiles that are designed to hit targets with greater accuracy and greater precision. It's not haphazard rockets flying out of southern Lebanon. It is precision-guided, programmed missiles that are programmed to hit Ben Gurion Airport, the Dimona nuclear reactor, God forbid. But that is the state of things that Israel has to be concerned with. It's obviously an absolute red line for Israel. But that is what Israel is stopping when it carries out these attacks in Damascus and Aleppo. And Iran oftentimes will use civilian airliners to transit these weapons. Very diabolical and characteristically so by the mullahs in Tehran, but they'll use civilian airliners to transit these weapons. And Israel's saying, we can't have it. It's an absolute red line. What you have in Syria and what you've had for a decade now is a collision course between Israel and the Iranian regime. And the Assad regime, by the way, in Syria. Let's not forget, when we talk about that ring of fire, we talk chiefly about the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the militias in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis, of course, in Yemen. The Assad regime and Bashar al-Assad himself, he's an Iranian client, folks. The Iranians are guests of the Assad regime. He let them in willfully, as well as Hezbollah. Now, they helped, along with Russia, more on them in a minute, they helped Assad to prevail in that Syrian civil war. And now they're there to stay, at least in their view. They're not going anywhere. Iran, Hezbollah, Russia, they are in Syria to stay. And Bashar al-Assad, he'd probably love them to be gone and to be the sovereign ruler of Syria once again, but it ain't happening anytime soon. They are there to stay. And they're saying to Assad, and look, they've got leverage, folks. They're saying to Assad, we bailed you out. We saved your skin. We're staying. And we're going to do whatever we want in your backyard. And Assad is assisting them. The Syrian military is assisting them. So Bashar al-Assad is also a ring in that ring of fire as well. And he's not shown to be the wisest ruler, the wisest leader over the years, which makes the words of Isaiah 17 become crystal clear even more to me. If you don't know Isaiah 17, verse 1, check it out in your Bible, pull it up on your phone. It says that a day is coming when Damascus, one of the world's oldest inhabited cities, the capital of Syria, will become, quote, a ruinous heap, and it will cease to be a city. Now, Damascus has been inhabited thousands of years, never completely destroyed, to my knowledge, and I followed this very closely, the history of the region very closely. Even the Mongols did not completely batter Damascus to the ground. And yet, Isaiah 17 suggests that, not only suggests, it states that a day is coming when Damascus will cease to be a city. Now, what do you think? I'd love to get your thoughts right now, folks. Is the groundwork being laid for this right now? Are we seeing birth pangs, tremors here that are eventually going to lead to something larger in Syria? When we talk about the coming Great Northern War, and I've talked about it many times here, we're on the verge of it now. The fighting right now is in the south, but the bulk, the most fierce fighting Israel will engage in will eventually be against Hezbollah in both Lebanon and Syria. Hezbollah, magnitudes more powerful than Hamas, folks, in every way. Foot soldiers, training, arsenal, missiles, rockets, all of it, drones, all of it. A fully funded creation of the Iranian regime. So the fighting is going to be extraordinarily intense to the north. You think it's bad in the south right now? No, it's bad. And it's going to get worse. Continue to pray because prayer works. But what's going to happen in the north is going to dwarf, I believe, what happens in the south. No one wants to see it, but Israel right now is pushed into a corner, surrounded on all sides in almost a pincer movement of sorts by these terror proxies of Iran. And look, Israel is fighting for its existence. So yes, it's going to be necessary eventually. Look, folks, you don't come to this channel to hear me give you sunshine and lollipops and blow smoke and not give you the truth. You wouldn't be here if I didn't. You'd go watch CNN or the BBC. This is no time to mince words. And as for followers of Jesus, and I am most certainly one, we are to be ambassadors of light, ambassadors for Christ, and to tell the truth and to shine a light in the darkness. And we're trying to do that here every day. Part of that is to equip you with the knowledge you need to fight the war of ideas. It's a war of ideas here for us, for those of us who aren't serving the military right now, obviously. It's a war of ideas where it's an ideological war, where we're defending Judeo-Christian civilization. We're defending the values of the Bible. We're defending God's land, the land of Israel. So you need to be equipped when this growing number of pro-Hamas protesters comes at you, shouts you down, and tries to tell you that Israel is a bunch of baby-killing war criminals. You're going to need to be able to respond. When they tell you that they're the Palestinian Palestine, and there is no nation of Palestine, by the way. There's Gaza and the West Bank, which I call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. There is no nation known as Palestine. It doesn't exist. But when people tell you there was a Palestinian people stretching back to time immemorial, they were always there, it's a lie. It's not true. There was a Jewish majority in Jerusalem as far back as the 1850s. That's a history lesson for another day. What I'm saying is this. Continue to join us here on The Watchman to have the kind of information that you're not going to hear anywhere else that you need to know for such a time as this. Now, let's go broader here. I've got a few quotes I want to read to you directly, and welcome everyone. Just to give you a shout out if you're just joining us. Another quick mention we need to share with you about Gaza and Hamas, but we want to go broader here and talk China and Russia. Two things first about Gaza. Number one, Israel is reportedly forming a special unit specifically to target each and every Hamas member that was behind the October 7th massacre. What does this remind you of? Obviously, 1972, in the wake of the Munich massacre, Israel's Mossad formed a special unit that tracked down the perpetrators of that horrific massacre at the Munich Olympics and killed each and every one. Israel is forming now reportedly a similar special unit to find everyone who was directly involved in that Hamas massacre on October 7th. Special commando unit. But not just them. Eventually, and again, Yoav Gallant, again, the defense minister said today, Hamas writ large, the entire organization will be no more. So we're holding Israel's leaders to that because it needs to be done. Because, folks, if that doesn't happen, what do you think the outcome will be? If Israel allows Hamas, at the end of this operation, agrees to a premature ceasefire and allows Hamas to live to fight another day, what do you think is going to happen? Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias, Islamic Jihad, China and Russia, more on them in a minute, they will become emboldened and they will launch more attacks. They'll say Israel doesn't have the stomach for the fight. They're not up to it. And even worse, the United States is restraining them. They're fighting with one arm behind their back. So this is the time, a golden opportunity to destroy the Zionist entity once and for all. That's what they'll say. If Israel leaves Hamas to fight another day, it is an unmitigated disaster. I believe Israel's leaders, and look, everyone you see in that war cabinet, with the exception of Yoav Gallant, I've interviewed on the Watchman. I've heard them share their worldview and their knowledge of things and the way they see the world. And the way they see the world is Hamas must be crushed, no doubt. And the way they see the world is eventually Iran and Hezbollah are going to have to be dealt with. And it looks like it's going to be sooner rather than later. Now, we posited this on Friday's live stream. And in case you miss any of our live streams, folks, just check it out here right in our archives under newscast on the homepage. But our friend Joel Rosenberg, who's based in Jerusalem, my TBN colleague, hosts a great show called The Rosenberg Report on TBN. You can check him out on YouTube as well here and also at allisrael.com, All Israel News. Joel said that he believes that right now in that war cabinet, and he had no inside information, but he said, look, based on his reading of things, he would not be surprised one bit if Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet are discussing crushing not only Hamas, not only Hezbollah, but striking Iran directly as well, those nuclear facilities, and perhaps even Iran's leadership. We know a day is coming when Israel eventually is going to have to deal with Iran's nuclear facilities. That day is coming. It's a question not of if, but when. We know eventually Israel is going to have to deal with Hezbollah. So is the thinking in some quarters of the war cabinet in Israel, let's just do it now. We have over 300,000 men mobilized. The country's on war footing. The country is united. This is the time. And I'll tell you, folks, Hezbollah and Iran may not leave them that choice, because when Hamas is in the process of being crushed, its existence snuffed out by the IDF, when eventually this ground invasion commences, do Hezbollah and Iran intervene and try to bail their boys out? Hamas has been a crucial part of Iran's overall strategy against Israel. It's been a thorn in Israel's side, a persistent thorn for years. Does Iran just let that crucial asset go away? I'm not so sure they do. Gaza has been very valuable to Iran and Hezbollah, not only in the physical sense, rockets, missiles, terror tunnels, what we saw on October 7th, etc., but also as a propaganda tool. Iran and Hezbollah and much of the Muslim, the anti-Israel portion of the Muslim world will point at Israel and say, look at what they're doing in Gaza, those war criminals. If that all goes away, hey, again, That's a crucial part of Iran's strategy and the anti-Israel crowd strategy going out the window. So does the Iranian regime, it's not Hezbollah's choice, by the way. Iran's calling the shots. And October 7th would not have happened without the Iranian regime. But it's Iran's call. And I've said Iran is holding a gun to the world's head right now. And they're saying, Iran's leaders every day, don't make us do it. If you keep it up, and Israel, if you commence with that ground invasion of Gaza, we may just have to open a second front. The Iranian regime is essentially blackmailing the world, and they're not being held accountable. Where are the consequences? They're just not there. The Biden administration wants to give them billions of dollars, and has, as did the Obama administration. So they're just not having their feet held to the fire. There's just no consequences. But perhaps there will be if Israel makes a decision that, you know what, we have to go after the head of the snake, or this is never going to stop. We can eliminate Hamas, but Iran will then sponsor Hezbollah and other terror groups on our borders. It seems logical that eventually we're going to have to deal with the head of the snake, Iran. Last point here before we go, and welcome the thousands joining us. Great to have you with us on a Sunday. Last point before we go. China and Russia. Here's a point for you. Now, if you watch this newscast on a regular basis, you know where we believe this is going with Russia. I know that Russia has a rock-solid military alliance with the Iranian regime right now that is mutually beneficial. I believe that relationship is only going to grow. And if you're in Israel's shoes, and by the way, Vladimir Putin has not condemned Hamas. He's actually been more critical of Israel than Hamas over the past 2 weeks. Vladimir Putin is not a friend of Israel. And you can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And the company Putin keeps is the Iranian regime, North Korea, China, and Hamas, and Hezbollah. There you have it. He is in league with Israel's greatest enemies, Hezbollah and the Iranian regime, and Hamas. 2 Hamas delegations have visited Moscow in the past year alone. Turkey has something in common with Russia, by the way, and they also have something in common with Russia in terms of the prophetic implications, where I believe Turkey, Russia, Iran, and others will form a latter days coalition that will come against Israel as laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. Funny name, I know. It's called the War of Gog and Magog, but it's a name you need to know. And I believe the groundwork for that is being planted right now. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, even next week, but that Ezekiel war is somewhere on the horizon. And not because I said so, but because the Bible said it's going to come. And perhaps we're seeing the groundwork laid for it right now. But continue to look for Russia and Israel to be at loggerheads in the diplomatic realm and to just not get along as Russia turns more and more against Israel. Last thing to say about China, something to leave you with, food for thought. As I'm just going to quote directly here. Pardon me as I look down at my phone. Here's the headline. China deploys, from the Daily Express in the UK, China deploys 6 warships to the Middle East over fears the Israel crisis could spark World War III. The Chinese military has deployed its 44th Naval Escort Task Force to the Middle East amid rising tensions in Israel. It's been involved in routine operations in the region, and it spent several days in Oman last week. And it includes a guided missile destroyer, a frigate, and a supply ship. And Chinese commanders are watching what's happening in Israel right now very closely. Eventually, folks, we know, as we close here, that every nation will be drawn down into the land of Israel, into a valley called Megiddo. And I believe China will be among those nations. But you see the prophetic chess pieces moving on the board right now. Hey, we live in Bible times. And as believers, as followers of Jesus, if you're a Christian watching, welcome, great. If you're not, you're also welcome here. But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And we are going to continue to watch and be expectant. We're not going to have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that only comes through that relationship with the Lord Jesus. So keep the faith, take heart, don't be discouraged, keep looking up, stay in prayer. Thanks for joining us here on the Watchman Newscast today. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.